All right, so for the last couple of streams we've been having, I think that's safe to say we've kind of been getting asked about DMC2's entire relevance to DMC as a whole. I don't really know where this comes from.
Yeah, this is kind of out of left field. So myself and Zim thought it would be an appropriate idea to add this to the long repertoire of the DMC reference videos. This one should be titled the basically explaining the merits of DMC2 and like what its relevance is, story narrative wise, power scaling wise, and then of course gameplay wise, what its contributions to each are, and why it needs to exist the way that it does, or at least what relevance it gives in its current existing form.
Yes.
So, for starters, we'll sort of be going through the story or the narrative and how that's like relevant to DMC, as also just what it adds like lore wise to its already established lore, because this is probably the most important section I would say to talk about because it's the one that people are the most unfamiliar with. As a lot of the time whenever I mention DMC2 or myself or Zim or Balrog mentions it, often the conversation is just like what is actually going on in DMC2. Is there any story happening there at all? Dante just flips a coin, accepts a job from some old lady, and then goes and kills this man with a fabulous voice. um, and that's just the entire story. That could not be further from the truth. So, DMC2 is the first game in the series that actually establishes that there is, for starters, an entirely third race of beings in the DMC cosmology, and that's
Yes.
the gods. Now, technically, DMC1 technically sort of talks about this with the divinity statue, but DMC2 is the first one that establishes that a race of beings, rather than a person within a position of power, in the way that we can liken the Watcher of Time to, exist. We
Uh,
have scans from the. Oh, go ahead.
I'll also say, just to clarify, in fairness, there are statues of a water god that have been destroyed, and there is the at least the Greek items in question. But this was more like actual blatant confirmation rather than like what could just be made up gods, so to speak.
It also could just be references, but this one directly confirms that there is a group of gods that are worshipped by. They're just an ancient family of beings. They inhabit a different dimension, and there are
Yes.
literally too many of them to be counted. And they come from every single culture and background and group of people. This is also clarified further in the 3142 art books that characters like Bulwark, his wolves like Freki and Geki, the I believe the Yodelglum boss, the snake boss, all of these bosses are either former gods or were deities at some point that then got transformed into demons.
Yes. Just to clarify, while we can't confirm which like god specifically the water snake was, it's at least according to the wiki and cert like basic research you can do, it's implied to be a Chinese god if I recall correctly.
It is confirmed in its description to it says as a reference that there are rumors of a great goddess in the far east that resembles this demon, but the exact connection is unclear, which indicates that the authors are trying to tell you that this is intended to reference something greater, but it's not exactly trying to spell it out for you. It's giving you enough information to start the journey into investigating. Bulwark does not have the same conditions. Bulwark basically is just blatantly confirmed to exist as part of a remote region's gods, and that he was reborn as an evil god after being destroyed in a great war.
Yeah, Bulwark is just blatant as it comes.
Mm-hmm. And then we have characters that fall under a bit of a different distinction, such as the Trismagi, where
This
Trismagi's name is specifically supposed to translate to the three wise men, with the Tris meaning three and the Magi meaning wise men. And they're
yeah.
directly stated to be the corrupted versions of the three wise men from the Christian lore.
I
And that the reason they look like that is just simply because they pursued more knowledge.
uh, I just love all those years ago when I said, "Oh, Dante should fight gods for DMC5. That'd be a great idea." And everyone's like, "No, you're turning in the God of War. We did it first."
Yeah. God of War didn't do it first. DMC actually did in 2003. Um, yeah, and Bulwark, technically speaking, if we're being clear here, he actually his name Bulwark is
Is
supposed to be it's supposed to be like a substitute name, like a filler name for Odin. It's a
yes,
name that Odin actually goes by. Then we also have the fact that his companions are two wolves,
that
which is
are
completely synonymous with that.
destined to kill him, and he also fights with a spear, which I believe is also. I mean, he's in missing the eye for God's sakes.
Yeah, then there's also the fact that they're, even if you want to say they're like because it says they're inspired by the story of Gungnir, so you might be able to say like, well, it's a different like Norse, maybe it's a different like uh, god. It literally states that it appears in Norse mythology. So even if it was someone other than Odin, like it's directly taken from Norse mythology.
Yes.
Um,
The implications
yeah.
here would still be pantheon of gods exist outside of like demons.
There's also direct classification in, or direct confirmation in the 3142 art book is that demons in general and their enemies are, while demons come from like Western culture and like Norse mythology and whatnot, their designs vary greatly based on whatever the developers want them to have. Like they'll give him anything from like Norse to like, and giants to like Eastern designs, like dragons to Western designs. Like they will give them literally anything. So like demons don't like, they're in like what reflects the gods existing in this capacity is the fact that the enemies that they also fight against are designed to exist and look like effectively everything. Difference here being that the gods are just referred to as deities, whereas demons are explicitly referred to as demons or devils or evil spirits.
Yes.
So that's a pretty huge like addition to that,
Yeah.
to the cosmology as a whole. And then we also have just the statements of the gods like hearts in game,
Yes.
the amulets, as you know, that are used for your devil trigger modifications. Those are just the hearts of literal gods that have died during the timeline
Uh,
in their battles against the demons.
Specifically, this is the teardrop part of the amulet, not the crescent or the circle.
Yes, but yeah, that would probably be the first section of relevance. Now, how that impacts the cosmology as a whole.
I guess we can also mention it also confirms that there were half human, half demon hybrids besides Dante and Virgil, because technically the entire tribe that Lucio belongs to is nothing but half human, half demons.
Oh yes, that's also confirmed in the 3142 art book. Um,
Oh, I'm English kind of
oh yeah,
bad.
but aside from that, we also have example of basically human antagonists being used as like I guess a defining like force that pushes against the protagonist, in this case being Dante. You might ask why is that relevant? So there's two reasons. The first reason is that every single game after DMC2 until DMC5 is governed,
By
in fact,
human
not even,
protagonists or human
yeah,
antagonists.
not even just every game, by the way. Even all of the novels are governed by that, because two's novel is also governed by the same logic. Because even though Void Mundus is an antagonist, the main antagonist of two's novel is Chen, the cannibal.
Yes, and then three follows Arkham, and then four follows Sanctius. Now, someone's gonna probably say like, "Isn't Sanctius a demon or something?" But none of them started that way. That was a result of like research into the arcane, so to speak.
Same with Arius. Like they all started as humans, and they all simply became something more. But that was started as a result of Arius.
Yes.
Arius started that trend. And then on top of that, Arius is arguably the most successful example of it, because he's the only one that's able to establish a major corporation that specializes in mixing science and demonic magic, which is also something that even like Chen sort of succeeded in doing, but didn't have the capital to do. And then that leads us to the second reason why it's relevant to have a human protagonist. That immediately introduces the possibility, which
Antagonist.
DMC created the capacity for, of human factions, which
Yes.
allows much more flexibility with the writers to create a lot of different stories, such as, oh, I don't know, the ancient demon clans that are mentioned off of the divinity statues descriptions, the demon disciple clans, the ones that are mentioned in three's manga, which are relevant to Arkham's rise to power, and then of course the Order of the Sword from DMC4. Like a lot of these only come about because of DMC2 crafting the idea
Of a
this can be
human.
consumed by the power
Yeah.
and like form a cult following or whatever.
It also does demonstrate that humanity is not completely like screwed as one would imagine, since there are several again like Chen and Arius, and then people going forward who can control demonic power to some extent and use it effectively.
It also demonstrates that it kind of further provides a solid basis for the reasoning behind the whole like it starts expanding into the uniqueness and usefulness of humans in DMC. And this gets further, I think, further deepened in DMC3 and mainly in DMC4, especially with the extended source material of 4's novel with Deadly Fortune. When we start realizing that the reason demons are so much more dangerous in like things like Argosax's factions or the various human factions is because they have intelligence.
Yes.
Like a demon is far more dangerous when they can rationalize and think because then they can properly control their power in a way that is far more direct and calculated.
Effective, if you will.
Yeah. So you attach demonic power to a human who's had their intellectual capacities their entire lives and is merging what they know with science, they become a force to be reckoned with, as we will get into when we cover the power scaling section.
It also helps establish the demon world's hierarchy as well.
Mm-hmm. As their
You want to
It's
finish
not the only.
drinking that, whatever
Oh yeah, I had to drink that. So this isn't the only example of this as well. You can check the 3142 art book if you want examples. This is also listed in DMC3 section where it talks about Cerberus's description, and I believe this is covered in the game as well. That it specifically regards that he is extraordinarily high intelligence, and that allows him to understand human speech.
Yes.
And a similar statement is made about Burial as well.
That statement was originally, if I recall correctly, with the goat demons of DMC2, because they're all referenced to be able to like they're highly intelligent. They know every single language on planet Earth or something. It's just their
Yeah,
own human language, but
it seems like a throwaway line, but then once you again like that's like one subtle thing that's talked about in DMC2, but then you start understanding how demonic power works and how demons accumulate power, and you start realizing intellect is actually incredibly valuable. And DMC2 starts bringing in what we call the smart demons. Not to say characters like Mundus and his generals aren't. It's just that DMC2 starts introducing like specialty type demons, like lesser demons that have like manifested specific powers under specific conditions, or artificially created demons like the golems
yes,
and such, which starts introducing again more possibilities to be presented in the writing that were never explored in DMC1 because DMC1, as its story like presents it, it's just a story about Dante going and getting revenge. He's just avenging his family and fulfilling the mantle of his father, Sparta.
yes,
Which, to be fair, Dante's sort of doing that here too. But the difference is that what he's exploring, what he's experiencing on the island, is unlike, at least at the time the DMC2 was a thing, is unlike anything we had ever seen. So, and then I would say that, well, that also, I guess that kind of covers how that impacts the whole like cosmology section and whatnot. We also get like further, we also get further ripples down the road with Before the Nightmare, because Before the Nightmare then goes back and references
DMC2.
the events. Yeah, like the events of DMC2, not just with the altercations that have like Balrog, but it also mentions Agnes, as it actually confirms how Agnes, not only how he was like so intelligent, but like why his contributions in the Order of the Sword were so valuable. It's because he worked at the Ouroboros Corporation for
Damn, if
DMC2.
only someone had a theory about that years before it was confirmed. If only.
Hey, we're not here to whine. We are here to inform.
At any rate,
Um,
yeah, it also confirms the demon world was still around, since there was at least some. There was some
oh
giving to
yeah,
DMC1's guidebook, and maybe even the game. I don't know if the game says the underworld's being blown up directly. Uh, well, yeah, the underworld's still around, I guess.
Yeah, so in the original DMC1, there seems to be this indication that after 2001, but before 2003, that the underworld was destroyed because, well, in that game, the only portion of the underworld we, you know,
See,
invade is Mundus's section, and it specifically says like the underworld's being like is like collapsing, and it's like okay, so we just assumed like Mundus was being sustaining it, and it specifically referred to him as like the demon emperor, the emperor of the demon world. So we had no reason to assume it was wrong. But then DMC2 comes along and it's like, well, that's actually not true. Also, there are other demon kings, so there's more than one ruler of the demon world, and there's more than one demon that Sparta sealed away. It introduces the possibility that Sparta didn't just cut off the head of the snake. He actually had to take out multiple leaders within the demonic underworld and the hierarchy to shut down their power structure and prevent them from invading the human world.
yes.
Then I think the final, I guess the last two would be character writing, and then how the timeline affects this. So a lot of people have riped on characters not being very interesting within DMC2. I would
Yes.
like to point out that Arius and Lucia are kind of a direct debunk to this. So Arius is probably the only antagonist that I can see that actually manages, well, he managed to accomplish like most of his goals throughout his life. He's able to build up a successful multinational corporation that specializes in a type of like science that no one has ever achieved before, and he's a modern day sorcerer. And on top of that, he was literally, if we're not for the fact that Dante switched a coin, he literally was like 2 feet away from summoning Argosax in the plot of the story and accomplishing his dream to
Yes.
become king of the world.
He was absolutely about to succeed, and then Dante was like, no.
And actually, even when he failed, he technically still received a portion of the power.
So you could say that even in failure, he still succeeded.
So we have a pretty successful, but also like I would also say like a very interesting like character as a whole. Like he's grounded in like what he wants to do. He just wants like to experiment with more like science and magic. He wants to see how far he can push the capabilities of like the human body, but he also wants to see like what the true power of Argosax is. It's a bit different for the kinds of reasons that we would view someone like Arkham, who Arkham is cartoonishly evil. Not well, I wouldn't say completely for the sake of being evil, but it's very, very hard to argue that he's not when every 5 seconds he says, yes, fear, evil. And it's like, okay, I think we have other reasons that Virgil stabbed you aside from, now that the final door is open, I have no use for you. How about we add like the list of
Every time
like
you open your mouth. Yeah, no. In
yeah,
comparison to Arco in particular, who's just very stereotypical, and which is funny because Arius is the one they usually call the stereotypical like Saturday morning villain, which is unfortunate because it's more so to do with the way the game presents it. And actually, even in game, he's still way more unique than Arkham was, at least in my personal opinion.
then
Intimidating.
there's Sanctius, who is just basically the Pope using like religion to compel people to do things because he himself isn't compelling enough. And it's like see the difference is that between Sanctius and Arius, you can argue that Sanctius is using the name of Sparta, the good, bad, or whatever quality that you prescribe to Sparta's name or his reputation as a basis to prop up Sanctius's like credibility. Whereas Arius is not using Argosax specifically to talk about how great he is or to explain how good he is. He's just like, yeah, no, here's my corporation that's literally making like engineering marvels. Yeah, they're probably doing some like sketchy shit behind the scene. Absolutely. But we're actually performing like scientific breakthroughs here and there. Like, what have you got?
I
It's just
mean,
like, well,
we literally show up to his oil refinery, which seems to be providing power to the entire area, and it's literally just demonic shit mixed in with the fucking a normal power generator.
Oh yeah, they mix literally like just basic anything from like organic materials, any kind of organic materials, bodies, fluids, bones, any human materials with some like demonic energy, and they can turn them into like man-made demons, basically. Which is something that again demons have never been able to accomplish outside of just directly creating things. They've never been able to artificially make those things. And
Yes.
Arius is like popping them out in a lab, assembly line style, and they're just summoning to the point where there's so many of them. They're just summoning around the city to attack you on autopilot.
I would actually say that DMC2 for me, at least when it comes to artists, also is like it kind of throws a bit of a wrench in Dante's philosophy a little bit. Well, it's never really covered in DMC2. Arius is the antithesis to Dante's like entire stance on like his own
Oh yes,
reality.
I would like to point out that that kind of leads us into Lucia as well. So Dante is under the impression that true power comes from the heart and that it comes from your humanity. Well, then Arius comes along and he's like, well, okay, so I'm making artificial demons that have power equivalent to, if not greater than, some of the best lesser demons in the series. And they just fall in line behind me and they can be modified as many times as I want. And they can even be stronger than some like mid tier demons. And none of them require, like, some of them don't even require like free will to do that.
I think I have
So
the advantage here in terms of ideology discussion, Dante. I don't think you want to play this card.
yeah, so it is very much an affront to everything like Dante stands for, which also technically speaking, like even if you don't find there to be much character there for Dante, that is something to be mentioned in the story because Dante's analytical skills and his investigative skills speak for themselves. So not only would he know this, he would be considerably offended by this action as well because they are again an affront to his like what he believes,
Especially
which
when
also gives him like more of a reason to stop it in the story.
every time Dante shows up, humanity is the true source of power. Arius, I would like to show you with empirical evidence why you're wrong.
Also, then we have Lucia. So
Yes.
Lucia's also has her own character arc where she basically shows that essentially a person that is created for a specific purpose doesn't have to live out that intended purpose. Like beings can find reasons other than what they were created for to exist.
Yes.
Now, some people have likened this to being the same as like Trish's, but I would find this to be a bit of a
A little
false
disingenuous.
dichotomy. Yeah, because with Lucia, the thing with Lucia specifically is that she wasn't instructed from Arius from word go. She was tossed aside and her life was saved from Matier. So she grew up believing that I was like Matier is my mother and I was trained by her as one of the protectorate, the guardians of
Yes.
Vita Marlee. And that's my goal and my destiny. And then she figures out, oh, I'm actually just a tool to be discarded at any point in time, and I could turn on human beings and kill them like wholesale, but I don't want to do that.
In fairness, that first part never changed after learning the truth, but go on.
Well, so the point is that she's under all these beliefs and this struggle
Yeah.
that leads her to a conflicting position, which then
Yes,
leads to her
absolutely.
humanity awakening. Whereas with Trish, Trish is under Mundus from word go. Like that, like she doesn't live an entire life believing one thing and then it all just gets crushed. Dante, it's specifically confirmed in Trinity of Fates that Dante's interaction with her fills what she is, which is an empty container. Like he fills her with the hope to embrace her humanity, but that's only because of their interactions. Whereas Lucia's already awakening her humanity, completely irrespective of Dante getting involved.
Yes.
Now, granted, you could argue that Arius potentially would have killed her. That's true, but she still would have been on the verge of awakening her humanity. That would really just be a matter of power. As
I,
far as like how she was acting in the story, she was closer than Trish ever was.
I mean, you could make the argument that Dante was the final nail that hit the coffin, since he is the one who kind of like reminds her in her weakest moment that like, hey, devils never cry. I think is what he tells her.
Yeah, but at that point, she's already attained her humanity because she's crying.
Yeah, and then Latier shows up afterwards and tells her like, yeah, you're not my daughter, but I still raised you and everything, so it's all good.
Well,
to
so
to
she
like
only came.
summarize it a little bit.
she came. I think she came to the realization before, like when the demon world was approaching and Dante's like mission 14, because she meets with Arya. She meets with Mathieu again after she realizes that Arya's created her.
Yeah, so yeah, if I recall correctly, she did have a little discussion with Dante beforehand. It's been
Mm.
like a 5 minutes since I've seen the 30 minutes worth of cutscenes of DMC2.
Yeah, it also confirms in the 3142 art book that even after she's confronted with the terrible truth, in spite of the pain caused by this revelation, she doesn't lose sight of her goal in defeating Arius and preventing Argosax's revival. Um, and keep in mind, like it also says that she's inspired by Dante's reassurance. She comes to her senses just in time to defeat Arius, who's undergone a terrible transformation. So, like when she fights Arius, he literally just says, you're just a monster. You're just an experiment that I created." And she, even though again with all of her power, she couldn't even beat him with Devil Trigger. She's now being a stronger version of Arius with like again with just her wits and her power alone, which shows that not only like she has a literal reason for coming this far, but she's also proven that she's grown over the story.
Yes. For
When by all rights she should be losing, but she's not because she's actually changed.
yes, unlike Trish who just dies.
Yeah. We're not
Yeah.
saying Trish is a bad character. We're just saying like the comparison between them is disingenuous, and Lucia has significantly more depth to herself.
Yeah, different starting points. I guess you could argue same end point, but I'd even go against that one a little bit since Lucia's end point comes about from her own decisions, whereas Trish kind of just gets forced into it by Dante. Because
Well, also forced into it by Dante and Mundus, whereas Arius doesn't have as much of an impact, doesn't have as much of a hand directly guiding where Lucia's life is supposed to be.
well, it's like because the problem is that it's after the nightmare boss fight where Dante saves Trish, where she kind of awakens her humanity that way. She doesn't have like introspection like Lucia does. Although again, granted, DMC2 is a very short game, so it's very easy to overlook that there's supposed to be an introspection there.
There is, but it doesn't change the fact that like DMC1 with a longer game, more cutscenes, and more like development and time
Produced
has
a
at least according and more additional source material because it has one's guidebook, the Kaizo Shinto novel, Precious Tears, and additional source material that covers it, and it's constantly referred and referenced every single game. And even after Trinity of Fates, it just confirms that like Trish is just an empty container. That's all she was. Like Dante gave her some hope to awaken her humanity. He was the spark that set it off. Um,
yeah.
so that
So
means like without that in Mundus's like stay, she never would have awakened herself.
yep, that's perfectly fair. It also provides like probably again like technically the oldest DMC character who'd know what the fuck she's talking about in the form of Matier, the only like other person we know who met Sparta.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they don't really do much with that in the game itself. We do get a little bit more before the nightmare, but nothing too crazy.
It provides some interesting backstory. It also creates again like another set of factions, the Guardians.
Yeah, the main thing DMC2 does is by doing things first, it opens the door for a lot of the other games to capitalize off what was presented in DMC2 and potentially do it better. I'm not going to say that for DMC4. You could argue Arkham was maybe better than Arius, but I think that's just more due to like the emotional gripes you get with Arkham.
Right. So this last subsection before we move on to the power scaling will be regarding how the timeline provides consistency for the character writing and the story. So um, the timeline doesn't. So the timeline doesn't really change Lucia's as much because even post timeline skip, right, where it goes one anime, two's novel, two. The Trish Lucia comparison, like I said, because we're talking about for the three main characters, we'd be talking about Dante, Lucia, and Arius. Okay,
Yes.
so Lucia's role and her comparisons to Trish, which is really the only ones we can make, there's not really like anyone else to compare to. So we kind of already covered that. That stays mostly the same in the timeline change. The big ones not so big one, but sort of big one is like Arius and Dante. You might wonder, like, why is Arius significant? Well, so for the reasons I just mentioned about what Arius sets up with the human factions,
Yeah.
Arius is super significant because now when we have Dante basically performing like all of his investigative duties after the events of like three, before the events of three, being like basically a private detective and handyman for like many, many years, and then having the events of the anime, and then two's novel, and then two, Arius's influence is made like significantly more relevant because literally, like, at least according to two's novel, I thought it was several weeks. I was mistaken. It was several months before the events of two. Dante runs into Chen, the cannibal, who is doing direct business dealings with Arius,
Yes.
and several of his, I believe, the secretaries directly are produced and made by Chen, and are then, or at least they're produced by the Ouroboros Corporation and sold to Chen, or the other way around. And then Chen obviously sends like his Phantom Knights, his direct line of Phantom Knights that he fights, that he sends to fight Dante in the novel, and he just ships them directly, their entire line of product, to the Ouroboros Corporation.
Which kind of ironic considering that those Phantom Knights do not appear in DMC2.
Yeah, well, so in any rate, the reason why this is like provides consistency is like obviously it's getting referenced, and it's a major part of why Chin is able to perform the research that he does, because Ouroboros would be the, as far as we know, the largest conglomerate of like demon research, the largest corporation conglomerate that's like a front for human demonic research in the human world. And Chen doing business with them increases their relevancy in the plot at that specific one in the timeline exponentially more now, because it means that every possible condition for anything that they could have done, any sort of research, any sort of weapons, artifacts, and whatnot, is now possible because they're doing direct business with one another.
Yes. And then,
Any sort of information or research being shared is also now a possibility.
yes. And then we also have their influence in DMC4 story, where we find out that Agnus was a member of the Ouroboros
Yeah,
Corporation.
yeah. Remember that guy, the chief alchemist for the Order of the Sword, who made all of their weapons, all of their artificial Hellgates, all of their Angelos, and their savior. You know, literally everything that they have for their entire army and their entire plan.
Learned it at the Ouroboros Corporation, presumably.
DMC2 not even being in DMC4, yet creating all the major plot points for its story to even occur in the first place.
Yeah,
Hmm.
the humanity factions, with the exception of maybe Arkham, because we don't have any direct connections, all greatly get like benefits from the Ouroboros Corporation.
So then, uh, with the last one being Dante, so a lot of people rightfully ask, like, Dante, or they state that Dante, like, not having character or just being like emotionless in the game, uh, is inconsistent with both like pre and post timeline. So just to jump back to post timeline, I don't think that's necessarily true. Even when it was like, I guess pre timeline, when two was at the end of the timeline, because it was not only was this own isolated story, it was at the very end of the timeline in the far distant future. We
Yes.
didn't know what happened to Dante at that point in time. Yeah, we could chalk it up to, oh, they didn't have enough time to like develop him or give him like lines, but he still has a personality. He just seems like more so bored, and he doesn't have a companion to actually bounce most dialogue off of. So
Lucia
I
does
would
not
equate
count
it
as a
more to
companion.
that.
She is a NPC.
Well, there's also the fact that we actually see in two's novel that Dante does have personality traits, that it is the same Dante just several months later. He's just, again, he's very cold when it comes to interacting with people, and he's not super upbeat about anything. If anything, he's actually directly to the point in two's novel. He just happens to have certain moments where he bounces off of other people because there's actually someone there to talk to. Because that's the one issue that I think is like a comparison, but it's not one that critics of DMC2 bring up. They just say Dante's like emotionless, but they don't actually explain what aspects of that are valid and for what reason. I would say the only reason or reasonable critique of that is that Dante should be having more dialogue with other NPCs. I think that's fair. But the reason he's acting like that is not because he doesn't have a personality. He does have a personality that's confirmed in Two's novel. He has no one to bounce it off of. Because
Well,
again, he's just killing as he goes through this game.
so it's also like he does have quips in DMC2's game as well, but again, like look at Dante's entire journey for a moment from where 2 would have been in the timeline, both originally and even after. Imagine being that guy. Now, obviously, when DMC2 was made, DMC3 and them weren't there yet, but imagine talking about how great humanity is and how great humanity can move forward, and then DMC2 is the one time where you're not killing like half demon human hybrids and shit like in DMC4 and stuff. No, you're killing actual humans who you've been defending and arguing for are superior morally to everything you've encountered.
And then on top of that, if we equate this to being post timeline change, we also have to take into consideration that Dante, at least according to the anime, has been somewhat depressed. And
Yes.
he's clearly suffering from a little bit of PTSD from the fact that he did more or less kill Virgil, or at least quote unquote killed Virgil, but he believes he
Multiple
killed Virgil.
times.
He believes he killed Virgil, and that is after a 9-year time skip in which he thinks he fought Virgil and left him in the demon world to die. So Dante is convinced that the only family he ever had left, he wasn't strong enough to save him. And then the one opportunity he gets, he just kills the man.
Because
And now
apparently
he's
he wasn't smart enough or intelligent enough to recognize his own face right back at him.
so the point being is that Two's novel, you can equate that to him like brushing off of a lot of his depression. But like I said, he's sort of working through it. He still is a little bit mellow in the anime because he's starting to see and talk to people again. We still see that he has like reasonable interactions with them. But again, I would say that if we give Dante's philosophy a check here, he literally thinks that humanity like can overcome things, and he see like we can also verify this from his interactions in Peak of Combat and various like DMC source material. Like humans are fighting back more effectively against demons now than they ever have before. They make weapons from the demon world to basically affect them. So that just to Dante's beliefs, that provides him evidence that he's correct. So when he goes to Vito Marley and he's like, "Oh, half human, half demons." Oh, obviously they're part of. I mean, they're strong because they're demons, yeah. But like, there's some part of that that's also like very valuable because they're humans, right? But then he doesn't get to see most of this for most of the game because he's mainly being tasked to go and kill the demons himself. And then the only demons he's running into, aside from like some spellcasters, some lesser demons, are the man-made ones by the Ouroboros Corporation, which happen to be some of the strongest demons in the game. So they're just imagine working so hard to believe this one thing, and then your entire belief system is just getting crushed and obliterated.
Yeah, and
So I
then
would
with like direct evil humans as well. It's just like and back to back too, because Chen also earlier.
not to mention the one person that could sort of disprove or provide evidence for this is Lucia, but again, he doesn't interact with her through most of the game because they go their separate ways. Because Lucia is convinced, hey, I don't think you're capable of going and getting Arcanas. I'm going to go do it myself. So they have very legitimate story reasons for why they divert their paths. So Dante has a good reason for why he doesn't interact with characters because he's going his own route. They literally have their own missions for this as well, and several unique levels. So yeah, I would say the timeline actually provides significantly more consistency. And we're just talking about the story aspect now. We're now about to get into the power scaling part.
Yes.
Okay, so
I don't even understand how the fuck this one's even a question, especially if you've been on this channel for as long as fucking like as we've been talking about DMC.
so if anyone is unfamiliar of why like DMC2 adds so much to power scaling, because I think some people generally speaking know the relevance of it. It basically establishes, as per there being like more demon kings and unique types of demons, that there are a significantly greater number of enemies in the verse that can threaten different types or different levels of power beyond like your average lesser demon, like I mentioned before. And it also reiterates a lot of the lore inconsistent statements from the game. So, for example, they confirm in DMC1's guidebook, right, that demonic power is gained specifically when damage is inflicted, because pain is the eminent principle of hell and whatnot. So that's directly reiterated in DMC2's novel, which keeps the same lore. The reason why this is important is because that statement and statements like this are reiterated multiple times in DMC2 as well. So there's more expanse of what the demon world does to people, what it corrupts and whatnot, and what have you. Then we also have examples of demons that are, I want to say, scaling to the higher tiers. So we have a direct statement that confirms for the guidepost for the hunters, chapter 7, clause 9, which is for the oil rig mission.
Yes.
When Dante chases down Arius, it specifically says that the challenger shall rise while the king evades. Now, keep in mind, this is all it says for the description. These guidebooks are the full description of what's intended to be said in the game. The game doesn't actually have the full description for these. You have to go to the guidebook to actually read what the game intends you to like say. So it says the challenger rises while the king evades. With but a jester, the dark disciple can summon a horror of the ancient world, consuming all in wind and fire. This evil tyrant can only be defeated by the devil within, or the demon within. So this is referring to the Fumataris, or the Furataris demon, the flaming minotaur bull thing. If it has a direct statement that it can only be defeated by the devil within, or the demon within, which indicates that it's forcing Dante to go devil trigger. Why this is relevant? Well, if you've been around on this channel long enough, you know that due to the DMC2 being where it is in the timeline, this takes place after the anime, after Dante has feats the anime of fighting Abigail, who is stated both by Lady and Sid, who are credible pieces of information, who are literally confirmed, have researched, and have been provided evidence that Abigail is as strong as Mundus, as the Demon King, and Dante spars with him directly. So this is a demon. This is actually a post Demon King Dante, because then he goes on afterwards to fight an alternate timeline version of Mundus, Alistair Trish, and then Chen, who he confirms is more powerful than him. And he gets wounded and does damage in basically every single fight, with the exception of the Void Mundus. And then months later, after all that time, he fights this bull, who is then confirmed to force him to devil trigger. Keep in mind, this enemy is summoned by Arius, meaning Arius would have to be powerful enough to produce a demon that can force Dante to go devil trigger. Yes. So base Arius is already stronger than base DMC2 Dante.
Not only that, but keep in mind as well that this is a DMC2 Dante who can kill Mundus casually in base form.
And we're talking about a Mundus that was also stronger than Mundus, like in his prime. This is a Mundus in an alternate timeline where he was never sealed away, and he became the nexus of power for his entire timeline.
Yes. So pretty strong, I'd say.
Yeah, so that kind of upscales a lot of the demons that he summons. Now, you do need like specific evidence for which ones, but I've already provided evidence for the bull. We have evidence for Arius. And then on top of that, we have two direct statements for Arius where he specifically hypes up how strong Argosax is. And the exact words that he uses is that I will gain the power of Argosax. I will become an all-powerful immortal who will achieve absolute wisdom and transcend all. And later when he fights Dante, he confirms that I must gain the power of Argosax or I cannot transcend all living things.
Yes.
So for a guy of his stature, which keep in mind, during this like dialogue I'm talking about, he's also fighting Dante. Now he says something's holding Dante back, and he's referring to like Lucia, but like in this exchange, Lucia is literally like hanging from like some psychic locks on the wall,
yes,
like way further away from them. She's not even remotely close to where they are. They're not using any AoE or anything. They're just sparring with like their guns and their swords. Especially if you see their boss fight, they don't have the AoE necessary to justify the statement of something is holding you back. So
I'm sorry. In case you're wondering what I was laughing at.
yeah, I know. in in acknowledgement of that, we kind of have to establish that Arius is not only comparable to DMC2 Dante, but he's comparable to this one as well, which would be stronger than the one at the earlier portions of the game.
Yeah, and he again, like, yeah, stalemates him, runs away, and isn't afraid to fight him a second time either.
Yes. So
Which does actually get supported because someone's gonna be like, "Well, hang on, but Dante goes to beat Argosax later on. That doesn't make any sense if Arias can fight him."
so in addressing that, that's actually pretty simple. Dante has what's known as reactive evolution, where essentially reactive growth, and power level, where essentially the longer he fights people, the stronger he gets. Because remember what I mentioned about like, well, in addition to the fact that he is Sparta's physiology, and there's direct statements under Sparta's description in DMC3 that one of the reasons he sealed away his power was that it was passively growing. So like Dante and Virgil, as they get stronger, as they get older, they will just passively become more powerful regardless of what they do, unless they seal their powers away.
Yes,
Um,
I believe he says that he just kept growing, fearing his own like ever growing strength. He like seals away his own power.
Yeah, something to that extent. And then the two statements from the instruction manuals regarding how demonic power is gained. Basically, anytime Dante inflicts or receives damage, he gains more power. So if we're to assume that he had a devil trigger to fight this flaming bull, any attack that he inflicts on this bull, he is gaining power equivalent to that, or any damage he's receiving. So the Dante that walks out of that fight is exponentially stronger than the Dante that walked in. And then it just keeps going for every single like, even if Dante's like one-shotting minor demons, he's still gaining progressive increases in power, because again, he's gaining power equivalent to the damage that he inflicts. Now, that's not like, well, that is a gameplay mechanic. That's also applicable to lore. Like that's an actual canon thing. So
Yes.
if you want an explanation for why like Arius, in spite of all that, still considers Argosax's power more potent than his. Well, we'll get to the one reason why that is later. um, that would be the reason Argosax is still considered like superior.
Yes.
So this is, I was going to say, this is what it establishes. This is just what's established in. This is just what's added in reference to established scaling,
Yes.
and the scaling of higher tier characters.
Yes, in DMC, but just for a more broader blanket statement for how it affects the power scaling. Again, if you've already been here long enough, you already know this. But for the longest time, the only accepted universal feat was from DMC2, and it was Argosax merging the two like dimensions together. That was like the main accepted feat for a while, and it also had the best light speed feat as well, technically for a while as well. So yeah, I mean, like it always carried the power scaling because of just Argosax in general, as he carries the franchise.
Well, there's also the fact that DMC2 just basically starts like the first game version, the first game variation of Dante at Demon King level, because we don't really, the weird thing about DMC is that we don't have like a game version of Dante that's at Demon King level like when he gets to Demon King level. That's actually the anime. Like the anime is what establishes Dante gets to Demon King level, because he fights someone who like Abigail who's exactly on par, and they're directly stalemating each other. Though they're more or less directly equal. Like they're as comparable as people could get outside of like Dante and Virgil in most of their fights across the series. But that doesn't happen in the game. So like DMC2 coming along and showing like this guy is just going around crushing beyond Demon King level threats easily, and then has to fight these people who are summoning demons that force him to go devil trigger despite him already being like way beyond Demon King level at this point, is absurd, because it's making the scaling chain just go higher and higher and higher and higher and higher by ludicrous amounts, like from one point of the game to to the end of the game. Then we also have how much it affects like the main character's level of powers. So aside from what I just mentioned, we now sort of have to talk about Argosax. So
Sure?
we had three different interpretations of how Argosax's power existed, and you've probably heard this if you've been in the versus community involving DMC, or if you've been in DMC and you just know like a lot of the lore. And even if you're not that far into power scaling, you've probably heard the lines Dante, just like when he after the anime, he just started sweeping Demon Kings. He just like crushed Void Mundus, or he just blew up Abigail, one shot him in DT, crushed Void Mundus with a couple bullets, and then two shot or one shot Argosax or the Despair Embodied.
Yes.
So we were under the impression that that was true, but we at least accepted on the caveat that based on Dante having a charge shot and stinger, that he at least did better than like Void Mundus. That was our first interpretation.
Yeah, he could also actually react and like block the attack. So even like his brief cameo at the end there, he was still putting a better fight than Void Mundus did in his actual full fight.
Right. So that was the first interpretation. So interpretation numeral uno. Second interpretation was when we got our hands on the wiki's translation, which directly grabbed the raw scan of like the Japanese.
Yes.
Why this is significant is that if you look at Despair Embodied's actual description, I believe for DMC2, he has a very different description than the one that's given under his Japanese example. Yes, or under the English one. So the English one says, possessing an androgynous perfect body and awesome dignity, he is sometimes worshipped. That is not what the Japanese version says. So the Japanese version, if you go by the translation given on the wiki, which we have two as well, we also have one from a DeepL machine translator. It says, Overlord of Chaos that one time held in his hands most of the demon world and subdued many demons, but defeated by Sparta, was waiting for the time of resurrection. Possesses both forms and abilities of every demon. Now, I wanted to see what this would look like if I was able to get like the exact translation out of there, and fortunately I went into the wiki and I grabbed the Japanese like symbols and I put them into the DeepL translator, and this is what I got. It's the second translation. At one point, he was the king of chaos who surrendered many demons with most of the Makai in his hands, but he was defeated by Sparta and waited for the time of resurrection. It has the appearance and abilities of all demons. So when we read that, we started connecting a couple dots because we've played DMC2 in so many of the games so many times that anytime new information is added, there's about 5 or 6 sirens that go off in our head, alerting us to various pieces of information. So the first one was that Argosax literally is the ability to manipulate time on a linear scale and can affect things like the demon world, which can do the same, and can pull demons from the past and future that are both alive and dead during the respective times, and has all their powers. We just thought like, well, okay, so he absorbed some of them, but it never really made sense why he had like Griffin and Phantom's bodies on his blob form, despite the fact that they've been dead for 6 years.
Yes, that was definitely the biggest red flag that no one could really explain until you get the expanded material.
And then when you realize he has a statement that says possesses both forms and abilities of every demon, thought maybe it's just referring to the ones and two, but then it says all demons, and it's like, well, maybe it's referring to all demons that are alive, but that's not true. And then we jump back to what I mentioned, the power scaling chain constantly getting pushed, and then we remember that, you know, Two's novel is a thing that exists, which establishes that demons like the beast heads can interact with alternate timeline continuities and know of all the existence of all of the alternate timeline continuities.
Yes, so it just got way more impressive, so to speak, as it went further along.
So what this essentially means, for anyone that hasn't spelled it out, Argosax, both in his base and in his Despair Embodied form, has the powers and abilities of every single demon from the beginning of time to the end of like literally all existence. And not just in the main timeline, technically, well, this at least includes the main timeline, but technically this also includes any future that involves a variation of the main timeline, which would
Yes.
include at least 3 infinite sets of timelines. If we're including all of the demons in his army, Mundus's army, and the random infinite number of demons that appeared in that one like war rig mission in DMC2.
Yes.
So, technically speaking, he has a near infinite supply of different powers and abilities that he can draw on at any moment in time. And this is also just the blob form.
Yeah, this will be the weaker basic version.
So if you
Which
go
sounds
into
so weird to say.
if you go into the 3142 art book, it confirms in his description that he is supposed to be a perfect everlasting being, that he is blazing with endless energy, as well as several other things. So when he enters his despair embodied state, he also gains infinite stamina. So he can use every single power and every single ability and every single form of every single demon with infinite, unlimited energy.
Sounds about right. Totally not busted.
So he could use, all of Mundus's abilities, Virgil's abilities, Dante's abilities, Sparta's abilities, Nero's abilities. Okay, so every single ability of every single major boss, lesser demon, main character that has a true demonic power or devil trigger, he can use all of them.
Yes.
And it also doesn't technically stop there as well. So the description also confirms that he is intended to be the androgynous human, the ultimate symbol of alchemy. So basically a perfect human. The idea of the sun and moon combined and other such motifs. The sun and moon is technically speaking a dualist system. So when we include a description like that and him having the powers and abilities of all demons, that technically means that despair embodied qualifies for what we refer to as transduality, where he is now beyond the concept of certain dualist systems. So sun and moon is one example, but we could also include things like
Life and death.
life or death,
Yeah.
time or space.
Well, just to be clear, he is the combination of these systems. So he's the combination of basically opposites.
Yes, and since he has the powers and abilities of every single demon, he would have transduality on a type 2 scale, in that he can affect every single system and every single duelist system, because he also embodies things. He also has powers and abilities of every single demon king who already transcend time and space.
Yes.
And he's also referred to as the perfect being in a verse where demons, as we've established in many of our videos, can self-actualize their powers just because they want them, and they can just manifest in reality.
Yes.
Kind of ironic, because he looks exactly like a human, also known as the beings that possess the blood that is the purest and strongest source of demonic power.
Dante, as he fights despair embodied, is just like vindication. But yeah, no. So despair embodied, massive top dog, composite DMC, and then very recently we actually got access to the Trinity of Fates story recap.
Yes. So this gets into, I guess people are wondering, like, well, when are we going to hear the second interpretation? Okay, you will. So the second interpretation was that we basically agreed there is no reasonable justification for saying that Dante won that fight on skills alone. We agreed that with this information and all of this contextual information, which took us a little bit of time to gather, the only reason you could say that he walked out of the room with despair alive is because of a flat AP and stats dom. So we went from, he probably two-shot him to, okay, he probably only got out of there alive because he was already stronger. Otherwise, he would have been like, turned into a kebab or something. And then we got to our third interpretation, which is that the Trinity of Fates, like DVD movie portion, basically presents for about a minute straight. It presents a scenario of what actually happens in the fight, where Dante, scripted from multiple camera angles, is fighting the Despair Embodied. And while he does trade blows with the Despair Embodied, he actually hits him a couple times and manages to dodge a few of his abilities. He misses and gets hit one time, and then he immediately goes into Majin form,
Yes.
which is a form that is confirmed to only be able to be activated when you're at 25% health, when you're basically on the verge of death. And as soon as he goes into this form, which is both immortal and invulnerable, he hits Despair Embodied with his strongest beam super move, like immediately. And that results in Despair Embodied getting blown back in the cutscene and his wings being destroyed.
So Despair Embodied essentially was not only able to practically one-shot Dante in DMC2 form, again proving superior to Arius, but was able to tank the most powerful attack from Dante's most powerful form, probably up until Sin DT.
And then is still able to somewhat react to him
Yeah, and
afterwards.
is still able to keep fighting.
So let's be clear here. This is the first time we've ever had like an interpretation have 3 different versions where the character has completely 180'd. Now, this doesn't really change Dante's scaling, but what it does change is that Despair Embodied goes from being just like, I guess, like, well, he's still remotely in the same tier. He just gets bumped up a few spots, but this essentially means that like Despair Embodied in any equalized scenario or in comparable scenarios pretty much kills most characters in the verse, because he just, what it took to kill him was a character that, especially if you use Three's manga, if you like, I don't agree with it being like, you know, my stance on it being Majin form, but if you agree with it being like
Majin form
you
in
agree with,
DMC3.
yeah, if you agree with it being Majin form, or you agree with it, what I say is being a form that Dante takes as like an adaptive response to him being put in danger using his demonic power, which both of these would qualify. Majin form has power nullification properties.
It does.
So the fact that he's hitting him with a blast means that like all of Argosax's abilities get disabled. He's unable to do anything to interact with this guy because he's now faster and stronger. He one-shots him at the beginning of the fight and shuts down all of his powers. And it's basically like a speed blitz as well. So Dante basically goes from sort of interacting with him to rage quitting the fight and just turning off all of his powers.
Quite the interesting way to put it.
Yeah, so that's a very, very different interpretation. So our third interpretation was essentially that Dante effectively just cheated, and Despair Embodied scales well above base Dante and Devil Trigger Dante at the time of 2. So, yes, that is a very, very different interpretation than where we landed. It's well grounded in evidence, but like still,
where we started was definitely not where we ended up with more information being added. Now someone's gonna mention this at some, either in the comments or say in the DMC5 novel, there's a line from Dante. I mean, what's the actual line?
The line is stated. I believe it's. Hang on, I can find it right here.
So like, yeah, because there are technically 2 lines in Before the Nightmare, and every time there's a discussion about Argosax, especially what we just mentioned on the streams, there's always one person who says, well, doesn't Before a Nightmare say that Dante beat him casually?
So it says, against the power of Dante who forced Mundus back himself, Argosax is nothing special. But keep in mind, like, this statement is also made from a Dante that doesn't know who Argosax is. He doesn't remember what he is. He actually only remembers the orangutan and the bull.
Quite a unique, to be fair, quite unique opponents, both in their own right.
So let's keep in mind, at best you could probably interpret this to mean maybe he had like longer fights with them, but I would just chalk that up to the fact that he just fucking cheated.
There's also the possibility, again, if you take the DMC3 moment as perhaps Majin form, Dante doesn't seem to remember actually DTing in that moment.
There's also the issue that um, Dante's memory as far as dealing with his enemies is only really practical to enemies that he usually fights in base and has a difficult time with, or like either his normal devil trigger or characters that have a specific personal relevance to him. Argosax has no relevance to him. Argosax's relevance is that he has a job that needs to be completed on the path of like him following in his father's footsteps, doing what his father couldn't do, and that's killing the demons that his father sealed away. So, like, it also specifically says in the first statement where like Mathieu talks about where like, don't you remember Argosax? He specifically says, I could never forget Mundus, the one who like killed my family, essentially, the one who I came to for revenge.
But
Like,
Argosax, yeah, I'll forget that guy in a heartbeat.
yeah, it has nothing to do with a matter of strength. The power of Dante's statement is really inapplicable because that's also made again like that's directly contradicted by what we see in Trinity of Fates, which is a depiction of what happens in the game. So it's also operating under the assumption that Dante remembers, because the problem is that he's still struggling to remember the enemies he fought in 2 as well. So
Yeah, Dante's been doing this for quite a while, so there's no reason to assume that he just wouldn't forget things.
this is also, that statement is also made in a conversation that happens 10 years after the events of DMC2. You're kind of relying on Dante replicating details in their full capacity when like it's been quite a while. So
All right.
yeah, I would say that's not exactly the most reliable way to put it. And then we have consistency of like just how consistent this is at the current timeline. I kind of already mentioned this, but I'll reiterate this again. Dante just fights Demon Kings back to back to back to back. So Dante is like DMC2 makes this consistent because it continues the trend. So he fights, he fights anime like Abigail Sid, right? In the anime, fights him, clashes with him. Two's novel happens. He fights Alistair Trish, who he confirms is faster and stronger than him in alternate timeline continuity. He fights Void Mundus. And to be fair, he does crush Void Mundus, but Void Mundus is at least able to brawl with him for a little bit. And then he fights Chen with the Beast Heads, who is able to damage him and blast him multiple times, even though he ends up amping Dante with the power of the Beast Heads as well to recover all of his stamina from the trap he put him in. And Dante still has a tough time with him. And then Dante then goes into DMC2, brawls with Arius, brawls with the Bull, and then fights Argosax. So he has at least 3 encounters in the game that we can confirm where he has trouble or he has to exert a significant amount of power.
Yes.
Or he's not in like an absolute winning state. He actually has some disadvantage or has to be forced to do a certain thing. So I would say DMC2 actually makes this like the timeline from the Demon Kings arc, if you want to call it that, from like the anime to 2, that year is the most consistent, like that would be the most consistent point for DMC2 or for a DMC game to be having Dante being pushed by Demon King or beyond Demon King level threats, and DMC2 nails that. It absolutely nails that. So not only is it relevant, it's very consistent.
Yes.
You have anything you'd like to add before we move on to your favorite section, the gameplay?
No, I think it's all about fine. I just need to. I'm gonna close my door real quickly. If you want to start segueing into gameplay.
I suppose. So, in the next section for explaining gameplay and the impact of DMC2's gameplay, we kind of have to ask, like,
Also,
what has really been added after the events of DMC1's release? Like, what was added in addition to that game that would have potentially improved the DMC formula or the experience? So, several of the first couple things that I can think of, one of the major things that I hear like no one talk about, a major point of relevance, is gun swapping.
yes.
So
First one added.
in DMC1, we do have a weapon swap feature in the form of the right analog stick or
Perhaps
R3.
the single worst right weapon swapping I've ever seen in a game ever.
it basically didn't have like a seamless like frame one swap where you would just go from weapon to weapon. Dante actually had to perform an animation where he like slapped his hand on the arm, or he like slapped his hand on the ground to switch to Ifrit, or threw his arms down and his head in the air to switch to Alistair.
Yes.
Um, which also provided a little. It was a great idea, but it wasn't executed that well, and
Well, you also couldn't switch to other weapons either. So like, it's not like once you get the Sword Sparta or the Force Edge, you can't mix it into the combo. No, you just get
right.
stuck with those two.
Right. And it also, I don't know if it would work as, I haven't tested it with Yamato, but like I don't know if that one's consistent either.
Oh yeah,
Um,
because well, actually, do you even get Alistair in the Sparta run? I don't think you do.
I think you can.
I was pretty sure Yamato just replaced that completely, but what? Not the
So
point here.
the point being, like, it was done okay, and really only the Alistair switch was acceptable because it was like it was at least there was at least a reasonable amount of end lag going into the animation. The Ifrit end lag was atrocious. It was
Yes.
god awful, and it made it basically inapplicable. DMC2, to be fair, doesn't have a weapon swap for its weapons, but there's actually a tactical reason for why that is, and that's because
Each weapon
uh,
actually changes the properties of your swing and everything.
yeah, like they all have properties of the swing, so they do more or less damage, but have more or less range. So there's actually reasons why you would want to carry one into the other. But then we also have the fact that DMC2, aside from introducing that very unique concept, um, it also introduces gun swapping. So you can switch from submachine guns to pistols to shotguns to rocket launchers on the fly, whereas you had to pause the game to switch between the shotgun, the grenade launcher, and the pistols. Now, I don't think Ebony and Ivory are that useful in DMC1, but the grenade launcher and the shotgun definitely need to be swapped for many different encounters. Imagine how much more useful that would be in DMC1 if you could swap your guns, but you just don't get the opportunity to do that. It's
Mm,
especially prevalent in a game like DMC2 where guns actually have like a really good damage output, and DMC2 introduces basically a mechanic to help with that then gets put in every single game. And the way that weapon swapping is done in DMC2, not just gun swapping, but weapon swapping for the guns, becomes modernized for every single type of swapping. So like how you do gun swapping, the specific, like, not just the sound effects, the iconic sound effects for switching, um, become a staple in DMC3, and the frame and the speed at which they switch become a staple for all weapon switching, including devil arms, not just guns.
yes, they both end up following that route rather nicely. Although to be fair, it's not until DMC 4 or 5 you get more than two weapons, and DMC 3 they only lock you at two until the Nintendo Switch port came out.
Sure. But then we also have I was gonna say, like, another example we also had was like basically customizable, like, and I guess sort of like buffed devil arms and customizable devil trigger mechanics. So for one, this seems like a little bit weird to have, like, I know, like, Dante not having like a lot of moves, but Dante being able to buff his weapons in terms of their damage output for like red orbs offers like an opportunity. Then it opens up the idea for more systems down the line to be created in future DMC games where Dante could get raw buffs to his weapons in addition to getting skills. And that is something that DMC2 has kind of put out there.
Yes.
It didn't get as executed that well, but again, it's an idea that's been presented, and DMC2 still executed the idea of the various weapons having additional range but less damage, or short range but like much greater damage to allow you to basically deal with certain enemies for certain reasons.
Yes, DMC2 was the first one that actually Well, I guess similar weapons technically, since in DMC2 you only have one sword over and over again. I know a lot of people aren't too fond of that per se, because every DMC game has different weapons. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the weapons kind of just serve the same function anyways.
It's then that I kind of segue into like the devil trigger one. So the devil trigger, I think, was one of the strongest things that came out of DMC2, was how often you could customize them. So you could give multiple different elements to your devil trigger effects, which people thought, well, like, yeah, that's kind of cool, but like maybe there's not like a super significant relevance. There is actually. So For fire weapons, you would do like continuous damage. In lightning, if you added the electro heart or the lightning amulet, basically, Dante would actually get extended range in Devil Trigger, so he
Yes.
could actually hit enemies, and you could buff that with the specific long range Devil Arms to increase your range to like absurd degrees.
Yes, you
And
are
then
hitting everything on the map.
the fire amulet would also buff raw damage in addition to doing multi hits, so you could buff that with the short range one. And then the freeze one would obviously slow enemies down, and you could buff that with like whatever combination. Combine this with also the special types of devil triggers, devil trigger elements, the ones that could heal you, could slow down enemies from any distance, including on bullets, as well as ones that could allow you to move faster.
The
You just had
actual
like so many options for different styles of play, even with such a limited move set.
it's almost like it facilitated player customization and player freedom.
Yes. I think it builds. I think DMC2, due to a lot of its gameplay decisions, builds a great house of ideas to pull from for newer
Well,
games.
no, it literally did because all of the basic ideas that are found in the four separate styles going forward can all be found in DMC2. DMC2 is a dedicated dodge button. That's where Trickster came from. DMC2 has gunplay moves that are literally stuck to Gunslinger later on. The only one that's kind of hard to actually pin down is Royal Guard, but I think they just
No,
wanted to
no,
give you a.
actually,
Oh,
that's also in DMC2.
oh,
So
really?
Arius has a guard mechanic that is identical to Royal Guard that functions around reprisals. When you hit his like black hole thing,
Yes.
or one of his like things, he can immediately reprisal you as a result of hitting.
Oh,
That was never found in any DMC game before then.
oh, well, never mind then. There's that one all
And
nice
then
and wrapped
and
up.
then on top of that, certain boss design is I was gonna say certain boss design is also pulled. So Bulwark's boss design, Angelo's,
Mangler, you cut
but
out a little bit.
also literally builds the basis for Virgil's boss design in 3. Typically, not only his lunging attacks, but also the way he blocks your projectiles.
Also, the fact that he also teleports as well, perhaps.
Well, you could technically chalk that up to DMC ones because Nelangelo still had teleporting, and they did pull the exact same character. But Nelangelo never had the ability to block your bullets, and he didn't have the long lunging like sweeps. Not in the same way. Not the types of ones that Virgil had, because Virgil's were kind of like precise, whereas his were not so much. He had like this weird dash into a sweep.
The way you
Um,
say it, he had this like really weird dash.
well, so Bulwark's was a spear, so it had like a very pinpoint angle, whereas like Nello's was more of like a sweeping motion. And Virgil's was closer to the former than it was to the latter. Then we also have, I mean, like DMC2 also has a different spin on DMC's like one of DMC's legacy mechanics, and that's time manipulation. So
Yes.
in the various games, DMC has multiple different forms of time manipulation mechanics, from Bangle of Time to Quicksilver to the Chrono Heart. And the Chrono Heart basically demonstrates a customizable ability that Dante can passively always have on in his Devil Trigger, where he can just hit you from a range at any given moment and slow you down. This move was so good that it literally allows for combo mads in DMC2, a game that has the lowest move pool of any of the games and the lowest amount of actions. It is so effective. It literally allows you to like actually combo enemies forever. And it's the first time manipulation mechanic that resulted in that, because the Bangle of Time just stopped time around enemies and they just took damage after the fact. It had
Yes.
no actual like applicable combo relevance. So this technically built the basis of Quicksilver in the following game.
Yeah. Completely true. 100%.
Um, then we also have to, I guess, talk about like superior Devil Trigger form. So Majin form, obviously, it literally was like is so iconic from DMC2. That's actually confirmed by the directors that it was intended to be in DMC3, or not DMC3, in DMC4. That Dante was actually supposed to get a Majin form, and the perfect DT thing and the concept art that we see, that's like the results of what was supposed to go into the game for him. So that's actually the impact of Majin Form as a mechanic, was that it was intended to be added, and then we saw that that perfect DT just got modified a little bit with some changes to its design, and then we saw it in DMC5 as Sin DT.
Yeah,
So
Cindy
like
T was. I think everyone who actually just sat down and looked at Cindy T just knew immediately this was meant to be Majin form.
this is like the successor essentially. Like this is next gen Majin Form,
This is Majin
and
form, but you're not restricted to getting your ass beat to get it.
yeah. Um, I would also like to say that Majin Form is probably, along with certain mechanics like Trish's like Scythe and Lucia's like weird aerial neutral sticks, are some of the first examples. I would say the first examples of having hidden mechanics for certain moves, hidden moves. Like I don't think that was a thing in DMC1.
Oh
Well,
well,
with the
well.
exception of maybe like charge shot.
If we're talking about like secret interactions and stuff, DMC2 is the first one that did it, but it's also the only game that did it for the most part.
Yeah, so the entire move list for Majin, because Majin's not listed in the game, isn't there. But there's actually a whole plethora of super moves that Majin Form has access to, and Zim can inform you about that if if you're really curious.
Yeah, no, it's literally free super moves across the board. But not only is it restricted, not only is it in Dante's Majin form, it's also in Lucia's Devil Trigger. Just super moves in general, which would end up actually, in fairness, while they're not secret, they will end up being copied and taken by Virgil in DMC4 and DMC5, and they also, I believe, Dante in his Sin DT does have a super move as well in DMC5. He has
Yeah,
the red one, right? Red swing
and
one.
we didn't get an example of this in DMC3. Like DMC3, basically all it did was it just gave us DT styles between Doppelganger and Quicksilver, and it gave us certain DT interaction
Oh
stand
no,
like
DMC3
fighting
has
moves.
no secret anything, no super moves, no kind of like reward for playing around with the characters. I would say, although in fairness to
And then
DMC2, it's kind of more because they
and
were
then
just
four didn't really like four just did DT buffed moves, which aren't really the same thing. Like it's not a secret interaction. You're not working to find the move. You just turn on DT and it just has like a different interaction. Like oh my Stinger's buffed now, or oh this move now has a Rising Sun uppercut on top of like the six kicks that it did normally.
yeah, not completely unique original attacks or anything like that.
Um, I would also say that um, yeah, like aside from that, there's also the character roster. So DMC2 is the first game to introduce multiple playable characters and secret characters that were playable, as well as the first game and the only game to have three characters for like until like
Five.
the special edition of the
Oh,
fourth
four.
released game.
Now, in fairness, since I know someone's gonna bring this up, didn't DMC3 have Nello Angelo as a third playable?
No. Using and also who are these people? You mean you?
Oh, I'm not the only one.
So Nello Angelo is not a playable character. Just because he has a slightly different
Bullshit.
moveset, yeah, as a costume does not make him a playable character.
I beat all of Bloody Palace with him. I don't know what you're talking about.
Trish's movesets being like similar to DMC1's Dante can't even be comparable to DMC2's Dante, because DMC2's Dante has like flip escape moves. He has falling aerials and like falling moving aerial moves with his guns and his swords,
Well,
which you wouldn't think that he would have. No other game actually has like non-moving before versus moving like aerial options. And what I mean by that is that so since DMC2 doesn't have like lock-on inputs, it has like an automatic lock-on. You literally have a situation where you could like jump into the air and do an input the moment you hit the air, like the moment your character is like able to act on the first actionable frame, and they'll do a kick or something,
yeah.
or they'll do like a downward kick if you tapped it slightly. There's no
So,
other game that has that without a lock-on.
yeah, no.
Not even the reboot.
In DMC2, yeah, depending on like how you click the button, where you click the button, and whether or not you're inputting forward or back. Actually, I don't think back has a different input, but basically, depending on how you hit the Y button in combination with moving around, you get different animation for attacking in the air. I also just could throw sorry now. Dante's air attack animation in DMC2 is also the most unique of the entire franchise. Every single one's kind of sword slices or just Helmbreaker, depending on what game you're playing.
Hmm. Well, there's also I would also say that aside from that, we also have some really huge, like big things for DMC2's like some of its gameplay mechanics, and I was going to say a couple of its
Well,
bosses.
actually, before we do that, I guess we should also mention that DMC2's Trish is literally the blueprint they did for DMC4. Almost all of the moves in 4 she had in 2, except for like her a few of her actual jump attacks and her spinning like roundhouse kick.
Oh yeah, she's directly like cookie cutter copy pasted into four, with the exception of certain Sparta moves and like bare knuckle moves.
And just to clarify as well, for those of you who are unaware, despite DMC2 not having an official hand to hand combat, because every single character mixes their body with sword attacks in some way, shape, or form, Trish did have actual hand to hand combat just using her fists. You had to, like, stab the sword down to be fair, but you could do it.
It's a weird combination, but apparently I figured out recently that you can just permanently stick the Sparta
Yeah.
outside of round trip. Like you can permanently stake it in the ground and then start running around with your bare hands. So you could literally do a playthrough. You could unironically do a hardcore playthrough mode of the game where you just use bare knuckle only.
Yes.
And that would actually be possible. That's also something DMC2 did before 5. A lot of people were like, yeah, no, 5's the only one where you could go in with no weapons. I'm like, Trish is like, excuse me? I did this first.
Ironically, one of the few things they did not port over was one of the more cooler aspects of the interaction.
But I was also going to say that DMC2 is also responsible for mission select mode. So if anyone has played through DMC1, especially if you've sped run it or you've done like lore searching, whatever, you are aware of the massive amount of inconvenience that it is to go through the game when there is no mission select mode, where you have to have like 5 save files for unique missions to do whatever, and it's so frustrating.
Yes.
DMC2 is the first game to actually introduce a
Level
mission select
select.
mode where you can go to specific missions for specific reasons, whether it be like farming, lore, boss fights, mechanics, whatever you're doing. DMC2 is the first one that introduced that.
Which is a
It
godsend
was like
going forward.
spectacular. Oh yeah. I was also gonna say, costumes wise, DMC2 is also the first game that introduced additional costumes for like additional unique costumes outside of like one, because Dante only got like one Sparta costume. Well, like Dante got like he got Diesel, he got like a classic costume, and then he got like um
The
I,
diesel outfit will always be just the silliest outfits DMC ever
I know.
produced. He
And
also
then
he did get a Sparta outfit too, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, he gets a Sparta outfit, and then Lucia also gets not only gets her own version of Diesel, she also gets like a secretary outfit as well.
Yes, I believe she might have another outfit beyond that, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, which also has its own unique devil trigger as well, which
Yeah,
is a
it
cool little
changes you
design
to
choice.
the actual secretaries, right?
Hmm. So, in addition to that, one of the biggest contributors, and everyone is aware of this, is that DMC2 is also responsible for the creation of the Bloody Palace mode.
Yes, it is.
This is a mode that is very, very beloved by fans, especially in 4 and especially in DMC5. Um, Now, while DMC2 didn't exactly create the best version of it, it did create the concept of wave survival in DMC, which the idea of wave survival in DMC is a fascinating concept because we're literally talking about a game where you're constantly expected, not just stated in some games to be fighting hordes and hordes of demons, you're expected to be fighting demons by the tens, by the hundreds. So, how perfect is it for you to be put in an environment where you can do exactly that?
And also that they actually directly tailor challenges to that situation as well. So they expect you to be competent enough to be able to pull off and have fun with what they throw your way.
Yeah, that's also without even mentioning that you get paid for your efforts. You get rewarded. So like if you go in, not only are you like getting better at the game generally, you also get to fight multiple different types of enemies. You can train against specific enemies. It was also used as a substitution for like a pseudo training mode, and you get rewarded. So you get to like test out and find out all this new information about the game. And this obviously translated over into 3, and this certainly translated into 4, because 4 had like
The worst
basically was,
fucking shop in the entire franchise.
what I was gonna say was vacant of like any real training rooms. Like Bloody Palace was the best training room in
Yes.
DMC4.
Yeah, especially since there wasn't even like a good mission layup like in 3 where you could just play mission 1 or 2 or something and get shit done. But yeah.
Yeah.
And then on top of, well, I mean, while they did invent the Bloody Palace, clearly they took the secret room idea and ran with that for future Bloody Palaces.
Oh, that's one final thing I think we need to touch on.
You mean
The
the
secret room
best secret
challenge.
rooms in
The
the
secret,
entire
so there
franchise?
is yeah. So for any of you who are not aware, but if you've watched videos on Zim's channel, you might be aware of this. There is a Bloody Palace secret room challenge that is exclusive to DMC2, in which if you go and find, as long as you know where the secret room challenges are, like the secret rooms are, you can do this challenge.
Yes.
But basically, like I'm sure you're all aware, there's secret rooms in like every game, right? There's usually secret rooms in a couple different missions, usually like 12 or so throughout the game, right?
Usually they're well, at least I think it's post 2 they become mini games of some capacity.
Right. So DMC2s aren't really, I don't think they're that different. No. Like they're mostly like
Well,
similar to like ones.
they're essentially a Bloody Palace room when you walk in. You walk into like literally the Bloody Palace stages actually are based off the secret
Right.
rooms.
So what makes it unique, aside from that aspect, is being them being like mostly combat applicable and giving you like blue orb fragments here and there. When you start going through the secret room missions, because I believe there's one for every mission if I'm not mistaken, or like
No.
roughly every couple missions or so.
It's because like some missions just have multiple secret rooms. So like they're distributed weirdly, but there's like more than 10 I think in both of them.
Yeah, so I think if I'm not mistaken, there's actually a total of around 150 in
Uh,
DMC2, or like 120.
let me
It's
actually.
somewhere over 100.
Well, if I recall correctly, Lucia has 30 total, and Dante has, if I recall correctly, he has 60 total. So I think we
Oh
barely
yeah, no,
hit 90.
it's 90. 150 was the total in the series. My bad. I had a number in my head, and I was like, where am I getting this from?
Where
So,
does this
so
number exist?
basically what happens in the way that you perform these secret room challenges is that to take the secret room challenge, you have to start from the beginning and you just keep going through all of them in order. And they progressively get more difficult, just like the Bloody Palace things. But some of them start getting like absolutely ridiculous. Like it gets to the point where you start fighting enemies that you would never see in a Bloody Palace mode. So, for example, maybe not a DMC2 is Bloody Palace, but in your average Bloody Palace.
Well,
So,
I
for
would actually
example,
say in average Blade Palace too, because you get a lot of unique interactions. But go on.
like you could fight a bulwark with like 4 wolves instead of, or 2 bulwarks and 4 wolves instead of like
Oh,
a single boss.
oh no, no, yeah. One bulwark has 4 wolves, and you can fight 2 bulwarks. Then you can fight 2 fucking phantoms. Then you can no like the actual. It really feels like because there are mods nowadays that let you spawn whatever enemy you want. It really feels like DMC2 was the only game that's like let's actually just throw random shit in here and see if they can actually beat it.
Yeah, and it gets crazy to the point where they literally have like a secret mission boss room where you can fight triple despair embodieds.
Yes.
And
Now it's one then two afterwards, but you fight at least two at the same time.
yeah, I don't think I need to explain how hard that is,
And no,
and all the challenges and replayability that also brings.
so not only does that extend, unfortunately, the secret missions do suffer from the DMC1 issue of like you have to have specific saves for specific rooms if you want to repeat that specific secret mission. Or
Mhm.
I might look that up and see because the secret missions might have their own mission select. I don't think they do, but
There's
I think there's more information in the guidebook,
Yeah,
but
but so not only do they do that, they also let you fight enemies you would not have encountered as the character. And in Dante's version, you get to fight possessed Arius and some enemies unique to Lucia's campaign. And in Lucia's secret missions, you do get to fight Despair Embodied at least once.
which is fucking great because this
Yes.
because she has such a better kit than Dante. So allowing her to be able to like spar with him when she's got all these aerials, she's got like flip escape, she's got like a gun projectile that slowly throws her down to the ground and cranky bombs. Like she's got all these things that would be so much better for trapping and fighting the Despair Embodied, and now you get to actually test that.
Yeah, so they do not hesitate, and like they do give you a playground to mess around with. And again, the actual unique fun challenges, not these. Now, to whoever enjoys the secret missions nowadays, to each their own. But I sincerely think a challenge of fighting different bosses in fun scenarios that would be unique to that area is a lot more fun to me than say staying in the air for a minute straight or something like that. But
Stay in the air or locate the hidden orb,
locate
or
the hidden
like
orbs
stay
ones don't even need a fucking
or
complete.
the great ones, the DMC3 ones, stay in the air and locate the orb after you get all the red
Is
orbs.
that a real? Is that actual real rule?
There's literally like a flight of the demon mission where you're expected to like fly and get all of the red orbs in the mission, and it spawns a blue fragment, but you basically have to practically use a super costume, or you have to like use Navon and then just spam your devil stars.
I mean, like, yeah, it's kind of cool that they like, oh yeah, test out the game's mechanics, but that just kind of like, it's not something everyone can do or everyone wants to put a lot of time into. With DMC2 secret missions, assuming you already like DMC2, they're fun rewards for going through like challenges. Granted, some of them do take a fucking while.
Yeah.
I need to upload the next set of Dante secret missions later, actually.
I would also like to say that DMC2 has also provided, I would probably say, aside from, actually, no, it has provided probably the best humanoid, like, final boss fight in the series outside of, like, maybe Virgil, and that's Despair Embodied. The only shame that we have in this boss is that we just don't have a move set to interact with him, or that he's not in a game where he can be interacted with. That's the
Yes.
only flaw he has, is that he just doesn't get to be pushed to the limit.
Because unfortunately, the game was released a very long time ago, before all these new fancy dangled ideas came along that were just mooched over from DMC2 anyways.
I mean, I could have chalked this gameplay section up to just like, DMC2 has some fun stuff, but like, hey, if it wasn't for 2, we wouldn't get 3. Like, no, it's way, way, way more than just that. There is so much more to talk about with what this game has to offer, aside from the lore and the power scaling we just put in there, or any of the story or narrative.
No, yeah, like again, especially with the gameplay one, most of the building blocks for a lot of the cooler things that came forward were in DMC2.
And yeah, if this was ever an advocacy for this game to have a remake, the merits of them shall thus be found in this video.
Capcom, please.
Yes, please, please, Capcom, spread the knowledge. Experience the knowledge.
But yeah, no. So more or less, just a video idea or a video here of why DMC2 is very important. Some people thought fucking that this was gonna take not that long. Those people were wrong because we're currently at an hour and 40 minutes.
Good.
Yeah, it's gonna be really great for the guy who's gonna have to come back later and edit this.
Yeah. What a champion. What a hero to the people.
Oh, it's gonna be just like editing Kyle's novel. Damn it.
Well,
Yeah. Well, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, do you have any other closing thoughts or?
I would just say that if I mean, if anyone has an opportunity to go and like maybe play DMC2s sometime just for like the challenge of it, or just to see like what we're talking about, maybe test it out, maybe give it a run here and there. It's not as bad as you think it is.
DMC2 is not as bad as the community makes it out to be. They are not to say that the DMC community is No, they're overzealous with DMC2, but it's not entirely their fault. In comparison to the other 4 games, DMC2 feels incredibly different.
Yeah. I do think though that opinion about it has been changing a lot more recently.
Yeah, it seems that there have been a lot more people who have been coming out of the woodworks and being like, the game's actually not that bad, guys.
Yeah, it's like not really that bad.
Yeah, no, it's not even that the game is good, like how I personally would argue to some extent based on things. It's just that, guys, the game's not that bad.
I think if we got to the point where we accept that it is like or that we accept that it's at least like okay to some capacity, we're in a scenario now where all of the DMC games are at least okay, and we don't have a single quote unquote bad game.
Yeah, no,
But, like,
especially since our quote unquote bad game was made in 4 months. We don't really,
yeah,
we don't get the right to complain about having a bad game.
that was the one thing I forgot to mention. So all of this game was able to accomplish every single one of these things and build its own like unique mechanics for a lot of these like characters and whatnot. And yet the whole thing was made in 4 months. 4 singular months.
Yeah, no, I've stated this belief on here, and I'll say it again here for this video. If DMC2 had a complete dev cycle the way like the others did, and fuck, even if how 4 did, given how 4 basically was like what a halfway dev cycle too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was like 8 months to a year.
Yeah, if they even had 4's build, it would probably still be like one of not the best, probably like the second best DMC game because 5 certainly added quite a lot.
It'd be better than 1. Yeah, easily.
It would easily be above 1, maybe 4. I don't know. Three is a really solid one, especially. But 5 would probably still be up there for all its like quality of life in general and actual unique gameplay factors among the 4 characters. You know, Neo players over there drooling over themselves at the sight of a new arm.
All right.
I'm sorry, anything. All right, so yeah, more or less.
I think that's all I have.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave your comments down below. And thank you guys for your time as always. Have a nice day. And we'll see you guys on the next stream or video. Take care. And if you're curious about those secret missions, I will be uploading the other secret missions probably over the course of March since I have a little more free time and I really should get that done. So if you want to see what those secret missions entail without actually spending the hours of dedication needed to go through them, feel free to check that out on the channel. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time as always. Have a nice day, and I'll see you guys on the next stream or video. Take care, everybody.